Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Just waiting for Cantor Levine.
Hi.
Morning.
Hi, Nomi.
Hi, Nomi.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Brit Shalom, what is your real name?
Barbara Loebser.
Barbara, okay.
Hi, Anna. Sorry.
That's all right. I see some familiar faces and some faces I don't recognize. Okay.
Debbie?
Cynthia?
Yes, it's me.
Oh my gosh. You can't see me though, can you?
Naomi, nice cat.
Yeah. How are y'all doing?
We're fine.
Great, great. I'm waiting to see who else is on that I know.
Good to see you, Martin.
Hi. Naomi,
Yeah, no. Is that what they do? Well, I guess that's what we have too. Okay. How do I get the?
Boker Tov.
Good Tov.
Let me just send one message to one person trying to get in.
You don't want any? I probably do. Hold on, I'm gonna see if I can send her a private message.
Hi, Gina.
Hi, Gail Cooten. It's Roz.
Oh,
Hi.
yeah. Hi, Miss Rush. Hi.
Hi, Gloria.
Morning, morning.
Oh,
Okay. There's Barbara's red couch. Hi, Nomi. How's the weather up in Canada?
It's still very nice and it's fall. All the colors of fall everywhere. It's gorgeous.
Oh, yeah, I missed that.
It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
Naomi,
Unfortunately, it only lasts a week or two.
It's been 2 weeks so far.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah,
Nice.
Naomi,
Very nice.
where are you?
Toronto.
Oh,
Yeah, I've never been to Toronto. I'll make it up there when this thing is all over. I've always wanted to go there.
Well, let me,
Very nice.
once it's over, give me a shout when you're here.
I'll give you a shout.
It's up to you. As long as I have ownership, we're good. All right, so welcome everybody. For those of you who were part of the classes over on prayer, welcome back. For those of you who are new, welcome. It's good to have everybody. I know we will have people from Toronto. We should have some people from California. I have some, all my former congregations. I have people here as well. So there's North Carolina, there's New York, there's Dallas. It's all over the place. And certainly Brit Shalom, welcome. Glad everybody is here.
In Charleston, South Carolina.
Charleston, South Carolina. All right. There we go.
In Orange County.
Orange County. All right. Well, we're getting there. This is great.
Yeah, New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Yeah, Pearland.
Oh my God, not Pearland.
Yeah.
All right.
Manville.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mute everybody, and at certain points I'll unmute, and people can have participate in the conversation as we go. My technical skills are limited. I will try and put some things up on the screen, but as much as possible, I ask people to run off the materials in advance because I actually prefer to see lots of faces on the screen rather than a text. It's just a personal preference. I like seeing people. Particularly in this COVID world where we don't get to see enough people. So all the more so.
Have you already sent out materials?
So the materials are, I'm not sure they were included in the Boker Tov and the materials there. So today I'll put up what I can. But normally they should be in the emails that are sent out. There's also a Facebook group that is called Tefillah. I'm sorry, it's Tefillah with 2 L's, Tefillah with CMEL. That one of my students from my earliest year of teaching, when I started teaching in 1980, she's part of the group. She's now in her 50s, and she has put the face group together. So I send it both to Karen to send out to the congregation, and I send it to Elise to put into the Facebook group. And so access is through either one of those. Should you not get it, if you email me sometime around 9 o'clock on 9:30 on Sunday morning, I'll try and get it out to you as well. But hopefully people can get it through those 2 resources, run them off in advance. And this way we get to see everybody's face as much as possible. So when I first taught this class was about 6 years ago, and the concept of rise of anti-Semitism wasn't as self-evident to people. But today it's clearly much more evident. However, I do want to point out the fact there's a tendency to think that the last 4 years is where anti-Semitism has arisen. And the reality of it is it's really grown from the beginning of the 2000s. All right. This is not new. It may be more concentrated, maybe or more evident. But with the dawn of the 21st century, Jews have awakened to the fact that anti-Semitism is not really a relic of the past. In late August of 2001, we watched on television as protesters harassed Jews at the UN World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa. In the conference hall, where the proceedings were underway, openly anti-Jewish literature was being distributed. The irony, I want you to hear the irony here. Ostensibly a convention devoted to combating all forms of prejudice ended up formally condemning the only democracy in the Middle East and in effect calling for its destruction. Men and women who prided themselves on the staunch opposition to all forms of racism assaulted Jews and shouted anti-Semitic slogans. They had signs, there were posters, there were leaflets with anti-Semitic stereotypes and myths. In the words of Hillel Halking, he described this convention on anti-racism as the largest and best publicized international anti-Semitic rally in history. 2001, okay? Obviously, most of the people at the convention did not participate in the outburst, but there was almost no speaking out against it. People were silent. They either participated or they were silent. All right, let's do this. Okay. I'm going to see what I have in the way of readings that I have online, and if not, I'll share with you. Give me 1 second. Again, my technology skills are terrible. No, I don't have the material. So I'm going to do a little bit more reading, unless somebody has.
I have it.
If you've got, who said I've got it?
Sarah.
Sarah. Okay. Reading number 1. This is about 9/11. Go ahead.
On September 11th, 19 men hijacked 4 passenger planes. 8:45 and 9:03, 2 planes crashed into the World Trade Center. At 9:17 a.m., the Federal Aviation Administration shut down all American airports. At 9:30 a.m., President Bush announced that the USA had been attacked by terrorists. At 9:43, a 3rd plane crashed into the Pentagon. At 10:05, the South Tower collapsed. At 10:10, a section of the Pentagon collapsed and a 4th hijacked plane crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. 10:28, the North Tower collapsed.
Okay, probably not new information to anyone, but despite the fact that Al-Qaeda took credit for the attacks, rumors circulated that the Jews were responsible, and those rumors spread like wildfire. Far too many people believed the lie simply because they saw it on the internet and the media. And for us today, we've become accustomed in the last 20 years to this kinds of garbage on the internet, but it was relatively new, and people were buying the fact that Jews caused this. There are videos of communities, people being interviewed and saying, yes, the Jews did it. Over the last 2 decades since then, the snakes of Jewish hatred have permeated and slithered all over Europe, and then ultimately here in the United States as well. In Belgium, again, this is 10 years ago. This is not the last few years. In Belgium, thugs beat up the chief rabbi, kicking him in the face and calling him a dirty Jew. 2 synagogues in Brussels were firebombed, and another sprayed with automatic weapons fire. In Britain, the cover of the New Statesman, a left-wing magazine, depicted a large Star of David stabbing the Union Jack. Oxford professor Tom Paulin, a noted poet, told an Egyptian interviewer that American Jews who moved to the West Bank and Gaza should be shot dead. A yeshiva student in Britain reading the Psalms was stabbed 27 times on a London bus. Anti-Semitism, wrote a columnist in The Spectator, has become respectable at London dinner tables. In Italy, the daily newspaper La Stampa published a 1-page cartoon, and it had a tank emblazoned with a Jewish star pointing its gun at the baby Jesus, who pleads, surely they don't want to kill me again. And in the first couple months of 2013, Nomi, would you read reading number 2?
Reading number 2.
It should
January
be January
26,
26th.
2013, Rome, anti-Semitic inscriptions, January 27th, Holocaust, nothing but lies and disgrace, and Israel is still the hangman. January 27th, I cannot remember. Israel does not exist. Death to the Zionists. Signed by the militia organization. By the militia organization have appeared on some of the walls in central Rome. January 27, 2013, Milan, an anti-Semitic blasphemous inscription. Europe belongs to the whites. Jews go back to the desert. Was sprayed on the walls of a local school. January 27, 2013, Purim, a black swastika found on a memorial plaque which commemorates 4 Italian partisans killed in massacres in May 1944 and April 1945. January 31st, 2013, Udine, an anti-Semitic blasphemous inscription, the Shoah must go on, was sprayed in town. February 8th, 2013, Yuji, anti-Semitic and neo-Nazi inscriptions. Anna Frank is a liar, the Shoah is a fraud, and some swastikas appeared in the city.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. In Germany, thousands of neo-Nazis held a rally marching near a synagogue on Shabbat. Graffiti appeared on the synagogue in the western town of Hereford. 6 million was not enough. In the Ukraine, skinheads attacked Jewish worshippers and smashed in the windows of Kiev's main synagogue. And Ukrainian police denied that the attack was anti-Jewish. In Holland, an anti-Israel demonstration featured swastikas, pictures of Hitler, chants of Sieg Heil, and Jews into the sea. In Hungary, and I could just keep going, there's a sense of fatigue here. This is all we're talking about. This is all happening in the year 2013. If you go online and you look up Europe in 2010, 2011, 2012, you're going to find one after another. What has permeated American society in the last 5-6 years was all over Europe, and it was inevitable that it was coming here. The political environment here may have enabled it even further, but it was inevitable. It was on its way here. I'm going to skip ahead to reading number 4. There's a letter that's excerpted here, sent by a group of national members of the Duma and newspaper and magazine editors to a Russian attorney general. It was drawn up by members of the Rodina party in 2004, and it demanded that all Jewish organizations in Russia be disbanded because they are extremist bodies and bent on world domination. The letter begins with the complaint that in 2003, there were 60-some criminal investigations for inciting interethnic hatred. Okay, reading number 4. Who else has the readings with them? Anybody? Gail, you have it? Gail, would you read reading number 4 for us? It's a little bit, anybody else have it so we can split the reading up?
I do.
All right, Joyce, about halfway through, if you would pick up.
Dear Mr. Attorney General, who is shouting, "Stop thief"? The overwhelming majority of these cases are initiated by Jewish activities or organizations who charge their defendants with anti-Semitism. But the overwhelming majority of those accused and convicted are Russian patriots. The major problem that must be elucidated in these investigations and trials is this: do the sharply negative assessments of the Jews by Russian patriots correspond in essence to the truth about the Jews, or do they not? We can assure you, Mr. Attorney General, that on these matters, there exists a large quantity of universally recognized facts and sources from around the world, on the basis of which it is possible to draw the indisputable conclusion that the Russian patriots' negative assessments of typical Jewish qualities and actions with respect to non-Jews correspond to the truth, since these actions are not chance occurrences, but are prescribed in Judaism and have been practiced for 2 millennia. Thus, the incriminating statements and publications made by patriots against the Jews constitute self-defense.
Okay. All right, Joyce? To corroborate.
I know, I was reading, I wasn't unmuted.
To
Okay.
corroborate this, we draw your attention to the Kitzur, abbreviated Shulchan Aruch, book officially published in Moscow in 2001. This is a condensed version of the Jewish law code, the Shulchan Aruch, compiled several centuries ago on the basis of the Talmud and required practice to this day. In the introduction to the book, it is frankly acknowledged that some regulations of the Judaic code of behavior are insulting to the non-Jewish population of Russia. However, even in this expurgated publication, we find the following provisions. In the laws about adultery, it is stated that it is forbidden to use the figure of two crossed sticks which they worship. That is to say, Christianity is considered a form of adultery. The instruction on seeing a house of idolatry, i.e. place of Christian worship, is to pronounce a curse on it. The Jewish ought not to help non-Jews with childbirth. It is forbidden to surrender a Jew into the hands of a non-Jew, whether the matter has to do with the Jew's life or his property. It is forbidden to report him or to point out the places where he has hidden his property. One of the 13 major principles of Judaism is the requirement that they must await a Jewish world ruler who will appoint Jews to rule over the other peoples of the world. In the teachings of the Orthodox Church, this expected Jewish ruler of the world is identified as the Antichrist, against whom Jesus Christ warned in John 5:43. I am come in my Father's name, and ye receive me not. If another shall come in his own name, him ye will receive. John 5:3, King James. It is forbidden to save them, non-Jews, when they are close to death. For example, when you see that one of them has fallen into the sea, do not rescue him, even if he wants to pay. It is permitted to test medicine on non-Jews to see whether or not it is effective. When a Jew has robbed a non-Jew and they force the Jew to take an oath, then he must in his heart proclaim his oath invalid because he has been forced to take it. It is permitted to kill a traitor anywhere, even in our time. It is permissible to kill him before he manages to make a denunciation to the authorities. And anyone who is the first to kill gets merit.
All right. So Martin Kagan, can you tell me what section of the Shulchan Aruch we'll find this in? None. Right. Clearly, this is somebody's imagination at play. It is not to be found in our text.
Hold on, please.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Not sure it's not in there. It's certainly, I think what happens is there are certainly discussions in the Talmud where this comes up. What may one violate Shabbat for? May one violate Shabbat for a non-Jew? This is in there. Now, whether it actually made it to the Shulchan Aruch, I couldn't say. I'd be glad to check, but some of it is definitely in there. I mean, what's going on in Brooklyn where they've attacked a photographer, religious Jews attacked a photographer calling him a moser, one who reports activities to the authorities. So, or they said moiser, actually. So we really can't say it's not in there. What we can say is Judaism is much more wide angled, and you can't say that this truly applies.
Okay. I'm not, again, I'm going to distinguish between Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and Talmud, again, because the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is really a law code. This is what you do, as opposed to the kinds of discussions that happen in the Talmud. It may be Talmudic in terms of essence, in terms of its real message, it's not. And it's taking text out of context and certainly applying it in ways that was never meant. There are writings. Look, I can't tell you that in the Middle Ages, there aren't writings that strike back because the Jews were powerless and their writings became their polemical way of responding where they had no other powers. But it's certainly not part of a law code per se. All right, but fair enough in terms of what you've offered, for sure. The immunity to all of this also was not the case in the United States in the early 2000s, because in September of 2002, Lawrence Summers, who was the president of Harvard, delivered an unprecedented warning about the eruption of anti-Semitism on American campuses. And so I'm looking for 2 more readers. Anybody who has the stuff? Raise a hand so I know if you have it.
I can read something.
All right, Gloria, why don't you read the beginning? Is there somebody else who has some? All right, Michelle, why don't you read somewhere along the way, Michelle, why don't you pick up?
Okay, reading number 5.
Reading 5 from the president of Harvard, right.
Okay, I speak to you today not as president of the university, but as a concerned member of our community about something that I never thought I would become seriously worried about, the issue of anti-Semitism. But today I am less complacent and comfortable because there is disturbing evidence of an upturn in anti-Semitism globally, and also because of some developments closer to home. Consider some of the global events of the last year. There have been synagogue burnings, physical assaults on Jews, or the painting of swastikas on Jewish memorials in every country in Europe. Observers in many countries have pointed to the worst outbreak of attacks against the Jews since the Second World War. The United Nations sponsored World Conference on Racism, while failing to mention human rights abuses in China, Rwanda, or any place in the Arab world, spoke of Israel's policies prior to recent struggles under the Barak government as constituting ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity.
Keep going.
I could go on, but I want to bring this closer to home. Of course, academic communities should be and always will be places that allow any viewpoint to be expressed. And certainly, there is much to be debated about the Middle East and Israel's foreign policy that can be and should be vigorously challenged. But where anti-Semitism and views that are profoundly anti-Israel have traditionally been the primary preserve of poorly educated right-wing populists, profoundly anti-Israel views are increasingly finding support in progressive intellectual communities. Serious and thoughtful people are advocating and taking actions that are anti-Semitic in their effect, if not their intent. For example, hundreds of European academics have called for an end to support for Israeli researchers, though not for an end to support for researchers in any other nation. Israeli scholars this past spring were forced off the board of an international literature journal. And some here at Harvard and some at universities across the country have called for the university to single out Israel among all nations as the lone country where it is appropriate. I think it's probably lone country, where it is appropriate for any part of the university's endowment to be invested. I have always throughout my life been put off by those who heard the sound of breaking glass in every insult or slight and conjured up images of Hitler's Kristallnacht at any disagreement with Israel. Such views always seem to me alarmist, if not slightly hysterical. But I have to say that while they still seem to me unwarranted, they seem rather less alarmist in the world of today than they did a year ago. I would like nothing more than to be wrong. It is my greatest hope and prayer that the idea of a rise in anti-Semitism proves to be a self-denying prophecy, a prediction that carries the seeds of its own falsification, but that depends on all of us.
And so, you know, we've certainly seen yes, Sarah, I see your hand. We've certainly seen in the last few years here in America that his predictions were not alarmist. And we're living probably in the most frightening time since the Holocaust itself. Sarah?
Oh, who wrote this?
The president of Harvard. His name was, I'm looking for it here, Lawrence Summers. Okay, it was in 2002. Okay. So I think we firmly established that we're living in different times than we had lived for many years as in our lives. Abraham Joshua Heschel noted that the Holocaust did not begin with the building of crematoria, and Hitler did not come to power with tanks and guns. It all began with the uttering of evil words, with defamation, with language and propaganda. He believed that such words, once having been uttered out loud, gain eternity and can never be withdrawn. That's the power of the internet in our world today. People have a place to put in writing everything and to make it for all time. It's there. No one is born knowing these kinds of words. They are taught. Hatreds are learned. And because they are learned, our hope is that not only can they be produced, these hatreds, but they also can be eliminated. They're not inevitable. That's the prayer with which we work. People learn to fear and hate, in which they learn everything else about the culture of a society. I teasingly have often said we are not necessarily as much individualistic as we think. Our society teaches us what to think. Most of us here in America do not eat our dogs. They do in parts of Asia. It's cultural. Many of our decisions are taught to us without us even being aware of it. And that's how these hatreds permeate our society. People learn to fear and to hate in a way they learn everything else. It's the media, it's the internet. Stereotypes and myths become part of the way in which we understand the world around us. We as Jews may not accept the stereotypes about Jews, but we may subconsciously have adopted them among others. I just finished an article, a journal article about the Ethiopian Jews, okay, who were brought to Israel in the 80s and 90s. And they discovered that within, as they've done interviews with them, the Ethiopian Jews were owners of slaves in Ethiopia, because the brown Ethiopians owned the black, those who were further dark. There seems to be this cultural thing where we have to put ourselves on top of others. It's a fascinating read. All you need for this to emerge is a crisis. And suddenly we hear, as we've all heard, the Jews are to blame. Crisis arises. Jews do well where things are calm. Jews do not do well where things are in crisis. It's a way of turning them against us, separating and segregating. So I want to go back into history now. We've kind of developed the sense of where we are now. And the goal of this class is to look back historically and see how this has played out. I'm going to take us back to about 600 years before the Common Era. The relative importance of anti-Semitism in pagan antiquity is a source of contention and disagreement among scholars and historians. The documentation we have is fragmentary, and so it can be, what we think is anti-Semitic can be misleading, and we really need to look at it through some certain kinds of lenses. So let's go back to Elephantine, all right, an island in the Nile River in southern Egypt. That's where I'm taking you back. Journey with me. By 600 before the Common Era, just before the Babylonian conquest of Judea, Jewish families had already been living on Elephantine for generations. They were not exiles. They were not refugees. They had chosen to leave the homeland of Israel and could have returned if they wished to. In those days, so why were they there? In those days, emperors often hired foreign soldiers to protect their borders because they didn't want to arm their own people. They preferred to trust outsiders who were being well paid, who would be loyal to them. Hard to imagine Jews were put into that category of the armed forces, but they were even in those days, okay? Like neighboring rulers, Egypt's pharaohs had hired companies of Jews, Syrians, and other foreign soldiers to protect their lands. And some of those soldiers had been stationed on Elephantine. And so that's the population we're talking about for our initial discussion. In order to obtain certain religious rights, the Jewish soldiers negotiated with the pharaohs who hired them on. And those rights were honored by succeeding pharaohs, but also by each of the foreign conquerors of Egypt, okay? And so the stability enabled the Jews and their families to build their own homes and an established community on this island. Much of what is known about the Jewish force comes from the Elephantine archives that date to about 500 before the Common Era. Okay, again, everything is somewhat fragmentary, but we do have the archives, at least in part. The documents in the archives suggest that the Jews of Elephantine maintained their identities as Jews and that their religious life, listen to this, centered on a temple that they had built on the island. They built their own temple in Elephantine. They probably kept the diet. Elephantine is ELAPHANT, elephant, INE. Okay. They probably kept kashrut, meaning they would not eat certain foods, and they probably did not work one day a week, so their Shabbat, a custom that didn't exist in the Egyptian society. However, we do know that the Jews of Elephantine were not so machmir. They weren't so strict in following the laws that we've come to know as Jewish law. They sacrificed animals, they sacrificed sheep and goats in their temple, even though the priests had ruled in Judea that sacrifices could only take place in the temple in Jerusalem. So there was a break from the leadership in Jerusalem. Their temple may have been built before the issuing of that ruling as a possibility, or the Jews who settled on the island may have left Judea because they disagreed with the priests to begin with. We don't know the source of how this happened, but clearly there's a deviation from the ruling of the priests in Judea. What is known, and this is significant, is that the sacrifices of the Jews in Elephantine made in their temple was not only a source of conflict with the priests in Jerusalem, but with the Egyptians as well as other Jews. The Jews and the Egyptians were often at odds because the Egyptians worshipped, I can't even pronounce his name, a ram god, okay, who they believe controlled, and this is important, the annual flooding of the Nile River. The annual flooding of the Nile River feeds and allows the growth and therefore is essential to Egyptian survival. And they had a god to whom they turned to say, please enable that to happen. And they are therefore outraged that the Jews include rams among their sacrifices. All right, it's an in your face. It's a blasphemy. However, as long as the rulers of Egypt protected the religious rights of the Jews, the Egyptians had to remain somewhat silent. Then in the spring of 410 before the Common Era, a group of Egyptians saw an opportunity to force out the Persian conquerors who had taken over Egypt and the Jews who worked for them. That summer, with the support of a local leader by the name of Vidranga, the rebels made a point of burning the Jewish temple on the island and several nearby homes as well. The Jews fought back. They killed a number of the Egyptians, including Vidranga himself. 3 years later, the rebellion is history. The Jews have succeeded. They've conquered those who tried to kill them, and the Jews of Elephantine but they have not yet received permission to rebuild their temple. They've got their freedoms back, but permission to rebuild the temple has not yet been issued. And they send a letter, a petition to the Persians, reminding them of the long history of a Jewish force on the island and their loyalty to the Persian leaders. They don't get an immediate response, perhaps because the Persians knew that both the Egyptian priests on the island and the Jewish high priest in Jerusalem object to the rebuilding of a temple in Elephantine. In the end, how does this get resolved? There's a compromise. The Persians allow the Jews to restore their temple, but they rule that they could no longer offer sacrifices in the temple in Elephantine. Only the high priests in Jerusalem were to have that privilege. And so there's a compromise. Yes, you can have a temple. No, you can't sacrifice. So the question becomes, was the destruction of the temple an act of hatred towards the Jews? Was it retaliation for the Jews' religious sacrifices that Egyptians saw as an insult to their God? Was it an attack motivated by the loyalty of Elephantine's Jews to Egyptians' hated Persian conquerors? Any thoughts? Does this qualify as anti-Semitism?
About all of the above.
Have all of the above. We like all of the above. That's D. But is it anti-Semitism?
Yes.
Why?
They were uprising, attacking the Jewish community because of their religious practices.
Okay.
Ed's shaking his head no.
They had a
Okay.
compromise. I thought they compromised and the Jews agreed not to have sacrifices anymore. So
The
they were.
compromise is by the leadership, but was the burning of the temple itself by the local population, was that anti-Semitic?
Oh, yes, yes, that was. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know what you were saying.
Ed, you don't agree? Go ahead. Why not?
They were a foreign army helping a conqueror. I mean, I mean, they could have been anything, but the fact remains they were part of a foreign conquering army, and the locals rebelled against them. And I don't think that's anti-Semitic. I think that is a reality of the situation. Now, did the locals call them nasty Jews or something along that line? I'm sure there might have been some of that, but I think the major cause is that, you know, they were a conquering army and, you know, they were part of this force that conquered them. And they were not loyal Egyptians, period.
All right, so, you know, as I said at the beginning, this is a point of contention among historians, for sure. Is it a political rebellion? Is it a religious rebellion? And the answer is there's supporters on both sides. It's unclear and undefinitive. It's not definitive, that's for sure. All right, both arguments can be made in this. Taking you to step two. We all know the story of Hanukkah. Let me take you through some of the history here. In 332 BCE, Alexander the Great conquers Judea. All right, it had previously been part of the Persian Empire. He brings with him not only Greek rule, but Greek culture. The ancient cultures and customs were melting in all the society at that time in the face of Hellenization, which tore down the barriers between people. 9 years later, in 323, when Alexander the Great dies, his empire is divided up among his generals. And there are three groups, but two that primarily impact us, and that's the Ptolemies of Egypt and the Seleucids of Syria. All right? Each dynasty was trying to incorporate Palestine into its own realm, and Judah was battled over for 100 years, passing back and forth between the two cultures. Mind you, both are Greek cultures. They're just being ruled by different generals. The question becomes, why? Who cares about this little piece of land in the middle of nowhere when they're controlling so much other land? And the answer is in its location. The land of Israel sits at the cusp of three continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. And so the controlling of this piece of land often meant the control of the trade routes. It was an economic benefit to be able to control this land. The Ptolemies are the first to conquer. They annexed Palestine and they treat it very carefully. We're talking about the Egyptians, okay? They're sensitive to the Jews' reputation as troublemakers, and they grant them substantial religious and political autonomy. In 198 before the Common Era, the Seleucids, under the leadership of Antiochus III, not the fourth is the one we know from the Hanukkah story, Antiochus III, okay? They seize Palestine and they embark on a process of Hellenization. Upon his death, ultimately he is succeeded by his son. There's a ruler in between, Antiochus IV of Hanukkah fame. By this point, much of the wealthy Jewish class of Jews admired and were comfortable imitating Greek culture. They were embarrassed by the old ways. You have to imagine the American Sephardic American Jews who came from Germany, and the feeling they had when all these poor Russian immigrants arrived. That same sense of I'm embarrassed by the old ways. 175 before the Common Era, Antiochus IV decides to launch a military campaign against Egypt, because what is his goal? To build a buffer against the new power that's arising at the time, the Romans. Okay? He's looking to build a buffer zone because the Romans are on the horizon. In a typical military fashion, in fear of a fifth column arising during a wartime, he attempts to unite his whole population through the creation of one culture. The Jews are a particular thorn in his side because they consider themselves the rightful owners of Palestine. And they insisted on keeping their unique way of life. The Jews also had favored now remember what I said, the Egyptian rulers, when they were in charge, gave the Jews the right to live their own ways. The Seleucid, the Greek Syrians, are not. And so you can imagine the Jews were showed far more favor to the Egyptian rule and would have been very happy to have the Egyptians win. So he's fearing this fifth column. What he does to try and get rid of that potential, he establishes a state church in which all the subjects are to assume. The god is the Greek god Zeus, and Antiochus claims to be the physical form of that god, and therefore the term we call Antiochus Epiphanes. He's God in reality. For the vast majority of the world at that time, adding a new god to their list of gods was not problematic. That was commonplace when somebody conquered. But for the Jews who had this concept of one God, the consequences are dire. And so while most of the world was willing to accept Zeus and Antiochus, the Jews were the lone group because of the monotheistic way of thinking that said, no, we can't accept this. And so you see the response of Antiochus. He issues a decree forbidding on pain of death any expression of Jewish distinctiveness. A pagan statue is erected over the altar in the Temple of Jerusalem, and pagan sacrifices are offered there. And the few Jews who resist are arrested, punished, and slain. That's the environment into which we find the Maccabees walking in. The Syrian officers, as the book of Maccabees describes, visit Modin, enforcing Greek sacrifices. A Jew steps forward to offer a sacrifice to Zeus, and seeing that, Mattathias, an old Jewish priest, kills the Jew. He kills the Syrian officers, and he flees to the mountains, vowing never to give up. When he dies, Mattathias, his third son, takes control of the rebel armies. So what leads to the Jews being successful in this battle? Okay, number of factors. One, the Maccabees were on their home turf and they knew intimately every cave, every rock and path. Think Afghanistan, when the Russians tried to invade Afghanistan. Parallels there. There's something to be knowing the land. Two, he underestimated the desperation of the Jews who feared losing their identity. By this point, they had almost 1,000 years of history. The most significant thing, however, the most significant factor was the approach of the Roman army. At a certain point, Antiochus was losing enough of his army. He didn't have to lose all of his army, enough of his army that he decided that the losses weren't worth it. He had a bigger enemy on the horizon. It just wasn't worth it any longer to continue. Let the Jews have their way. I got bigger fish to fry. And so he steps back. Now one can see the hand of God in that, and certainly the book of Maccabees and the way Jewish tradition has portrayed it, that's how it would be. I'm not sure a historian would work with the same lens. Anytime I teach history, I divide myself between the theologian Levine and the historical Levine. They don't always play together nicely. The temple is restored, it's recaptured, the Jews cleanse it, the traditional service is reestablished. And therefore we have a Chanukat Habayit, a rededication of the temple. That's what we're celebrating. Popular belief portrays Antiochus as an early Hitler and his attack as anti-Semitic. But there really is little evidence for this. Antiochus is anticipating the invasion of Rome and therefore is fearing an uprising, an internal uprising. He also has financial needs. Think if you need financial support, what you could gain by going to the Vatican today. There's lots of money in gold. It's just sitting there. That's what he used. That's why he wanted the temple. It was a source of financial support at the time. It had political expediency is what's going on. Now, I want to point out this doesn't dismiss the suffering that went on. And it doesn't dismiss the roots of anti-Semitism appearing during these times. The Jews had clearly established themselves and a persistence to distinctiveness. They were going to stick to their ways. Instead of intermingling and assimilating, they insisted on preserving their own monotheistic religion, their own dietary practices, their own separate lifestyle, and specifically a distinctive self-conscious pride as a people covenanted to one God. That set them aside from the pagan world. All right. No other nation at the time was insistent on the rejection of other gods. They simply could be incorporated. Here was a people that was different on that level. And it led on many of the Jews at the time a sense to a moral superiority. You guys are all stupid. You have all these many gods. We have the one God. All right? A moral superiority. Some could say they were just foreigners. However, it's clear, as it was with the Egyptians, that their dislike of Jews was deeper than the usual hostility towards foreigners. All right. In Egypt, you saw this in the rebuttal of the Exodus story. All right. By the 3rd century, Manetho, an Egyptian priest, had begun to debunk from his perspective the whole story of the Exodus. His account presented the Hebrews as a race of lepers who had been cast out of Egypt in the days of Moses. All right. These were all the people with COVID. Get rid of them. They're lepers. Jewish civilization is depicted as sterile, having produced nothing of any great value. The Jews are superstitious. They're a godless people who worship an ass's head in their temple in Jerusalem. And despite the association of Christian anti-Semitism with the charge of ritual murder that shows up later, it actually was first made by a Greek. Appian, the noted Homeric scholar, charged the Jews with slaughtering and eating non-Jews in religious rituals. He claimed that once a year, Jews would kidnap a Gentile Greek, fatten him up for a year, slay him, sacrifice his body as part of the ritual, and then to eat that individual. They're also accused, Jews are also accused of being atheists. Because who else prays to a God that you can't see? Everybody else has idols. The Jews are praying to something that doesn't exist. They're atheists. And as a result of these kinds of accusations, by the time the Romans do assume control in 63 of the Common Era, anti-Semitism already is deeply rooted in the ancient world. The Jews' insistence on denying Roman gods by living by different values and rules and leading their own national life through religious political institutions such as the Sanhedrin is regarded by the Romans as proof that Jews hate everyone else. Further, emphasizing their uniqueness, now today's world you wouldn't see this, but this is what Tacitus wrote about the Jews. He says, the Jews regarded as a crime to kill a newborn infant. Apparently, that wasn't the way of the ancient world. In contrast, the Romans and like the Greeks before them, killed mentally and physically handicapped infants, believing that keeping such children alive was pointless and unaesthetic. Right? So the Jews, even in their attempt to preserve life, had set themselves aside from the surrounding cultures. By the middle of the 1st century, up to 10% of the Roman Empire was Jewish. Many of the converts had come from among the Roman population who had been disenchanted with Roman paganism and its immorality. To the rulers of Rome, this was distressing, okay? You have the words of Seneca saying the conquered, the Jews, have given their laws to the conquerors. And so though anti-Semitism, so we have anti-Semitism reaching a new and more intense phase going forward when Rome becomes Christian, but nonetheless, the hatred of the Jews does precede Christianity. That's where I want to leave it for today. There wasn't necessarily a formalized anti-Semitism, but the roots are laying there, just waiting to be evoked. Next week, we'll take Christianity and the introduction of Christianity, early Christianity, and look at how that really, anti-Semitism as we know it today, became a reality in the world. So I'll open up to any comments at this point. Please feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, there are comments.
I was just thinking the traditional Aleinu prayer kind of says, well, maybe they were right, but.
Well, and that's an example, by the way, someone talked about earlier. I don't know who said it, was talking about there were anti-Semitic there were anti-Christian comments in Jewish writings. The line that's been removed from the Aleinu, as you described, was clearly one of them. There's a line, for those of you who are not part of that class, there's a line that was removed from the Aleinu in the 1800s that described those who pray to gods of nothingness, of Hevel who cannot save them. All right. And the claim is that one of the words in there reflects it has the numeric value of the number 316, which is the number of Yeshu, Jesus' name in Hebrew. Yet clearly the Jews were fighting back in the only way they had available to them, in words. They were powerless. They didn't have the ability to fight back with armies. So yeah, some of it does emerge. Yeah.
I just want to mention, we have a Jewish channel here called Jewish Broadcasting System or Service, and they had a teacher, Professor Ruth Wisen or Ruth Wise, who spoke about when the president of Harvard, Lawrence Summer, gave that speech, and she taught when he left, and she said it was terrible because it really was becoming very anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. And she had left and retired, but was afraid of what was going to happen to Harvard since then. And she was there. It was a very good program.
And that's 2002.
That was 2000. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So it's been going on for a while.
Yeah. Anyone else? All right. I want to thank you for joining. I will get the materials out by Tuesday or Wednesday this week. And, I encourage you, run them off. First of all, every one of them not only has the readings, but it has an outline of what we're going through. So you have some sense of a context of how we're proceeding. I know when I would take classes, that always helped me. So I try to provide that as well. Have a wonderful week. Sometimes I will tell you this class can get a little depressing. It's hard. Will we get to how to combat it? I'm not sure I can provide the answer. Maybe collectively we can process this a little bit. If I knew fully the answers to that, I'd have my Nobel Peace Prize sitting on my shelf somewhere. But we can talk collectively and try to come up with some solutions as well. Have a good week, everybody.
You too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cantor.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Gail.
Bye, Maurice.